Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we now continue with our exploration of Asian horror during the 1980s. In our last video we were very lucky in terms of availability, because the vast majority of the better titles were widely available on DVD. One thing you'll notice in this particular video is that most of the films that I'm going to recommend are not widely available on DVD. However, my faithful viewers should know the strategy to take under these circumstances. If you're really interested in a film, and it's available on a streaming site like YouTube, you should watch it, even if it does not have subtitles. Because Asian horror films can still be very enjoyable that way. And let me tell you, many of the films I'm covering in this video are visually driven cult films anyways. They're not particularly concerned with scintillating dialogue or character development. Some exceptions aside, but a lot of these films can be enjoyed without subtitles. Now, other titles of interest that are not available on YouTube should be added to your watch list for future viewing when they pop up again. And remember, all of the movies I discuss in this video will be listed in the description box below. So let's begin. Got some good stuff here. We begin with Devil Fetus, a Hong Kong horror film from 1983. With a title like Devil Fetus, this has got to be pretty good, and it is pretty good. So after purchasing a cursed vase at an auction, a woman is raped and impregnated by a demon made of green sludge. Now, if you remember from our last video, we covered a film titled Curse of Evil from 1982, which had a pink sludge demon. And later in this video, we are going to cover a film with a mud-caked killer. I mean, they should have just kept making films with antagonists that are caked in different colors. We could have a red-caked killer for Valentine's Day, a yellow-caked killer for Easter, etc. But, unfortunately, the caked killer concept never really caught on to a significant degree, so we really have to appreciate it when it presents itself. Now, the script in Devil Fetus is very weak, as you might expect from a film entitled Devil Fetus. But there are a wide variety of horror sequences to enjoy, some of which are quite unique and memorable. Most of the best moments occur during the later half. Highlights include a loony wizard versus possessed human battle, and a head scene, which I'll just leave it at that. You'll see what I'm talking about if you watch this one. This is atmospheric at times, so if you like moody stuff, you got some atmosphere here. It's also unintentionally funny at times, and that blend between, serious, pretty good quality stuff and unintentionally hilarious stuff is a common trait of these Hong Kong horror films from the 1980s, if you couldn't tell already. So Devil Fetus, yeah, I would recommend it, sure. Now, it's not widely available on DVD anymore. It used to be. However, DVDs do pop up at times on eBay or iOffer, so look out for it. It took me a while to find this one, though. I wanted to watch this movie for years before I eventually saw it. I forgot where I saw it. Next, Possessed. All right, a 1983 Hong Kong horror film. Let's see here. So, Possessed. After killing an insane man, two cops must deal with ghosts and demonic possession. So basically, this nut is shot dead by the cops after he refused to listen to them and stabbed a woman to death. So after the encounter, though, the cops start seeing strange things, and one of their girlfriends is also haunted. So this guy's coming back for revenge from the grave. Now, since their fellow cops are useless against spirits, a Taoist priest is hired to sort out the problem. So Possessed it does have some pacing problems, okay? It's a bit dull in spots, but it does have its moments. The opening is pretty good, and there are some entertaining scenes peppered throughout. There's actually, if you can believe it or not, a funny rape sequence, which I remember seeing a few other films from Hong Kong during the 80s and early 90s that attempt to make rape funny. As offensive as it sounds, sometimes it actually works, depending on your level of humor, depending how low you're willing to go. And also there is a sufficiently entertaining finale here. Now, a few online reviewers have stated that A Scene or Two rips off Poltergeist, but it's been a while since I've seen this one, so I cannot definitively confirm or deny that claim. In any case, I do think that the sequel, entitled Possessed 2, of course, is more fun and more memorable, and we will cover that one a bit later in this video. But the first film is watchable. Now, I never found this one with subtitles, but it is available on YouTube without subs. So that is Possessed for you. And I'll give you a little pointer here when you're searching on YouTube, because if you just type in Possessed, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to find it. Type in the search term Possessed Hong Kong Film, okay, and it'll pop up. Because I typed in Possessed and some other different things, and it took a while for me to find it. Even Possessed in the year of release, it's tough to find, so use that search term. The next film is a good one. It's one of the better ones we're going to cover in this video. It's a Japanese horror drama hybrid called Village of Doom from 1983. Now, this is set during World War II. A young man is kept from serving in the war due to his tuberculosis condition. His affairs with sex-starved village women, however, as well as his clashes with others, leads to tragedy. Now, the main character here is timid near the beginning, but gradually becomes more aggressive throughout. Events within the village slowly spiral out of control. So this is more of a dramatically intense film, with a serious mean streak about it. There are some disturbing and violent moments here for sure. The lengthy finale is very memorable, to say the least. The few online reviewers who have seen this have given it very positive feedback, and I have to agree. This is a very impactful film that should be more well known. Now, availability of Village of Doom, it's difficult to find, not even on YouTube right now. So put it on your list though. If you could find it, definitely watch it. It's a good one. Now, the next two films we're covering are sequels to films we just covered, and I believe that both of them are better than the originals. So we begin with Devil Fetus 2, The Rape After, a Hong Kong horror film from 1984. What is it with these Hong Kong films and rape? You'll notice, we'll get into a few Category 3 films later on in this series. There's quite a bit to discuss about those, but for some reason, Hong Kong had this thing with, how would you claim it to be, offensive depictions of rape. So, it's something to look forward to, I guess, right? So in this film, demonic horror befalls a young actress when her acquaintance steals a cursed statue. Now, the first film was about a cursed vase. This one is about a cursed statue. So they're really mixing things up here, right? Sarcasm. But unlike many horror films that would go the ghost or spirit route with this premise, Devil Fetus 2 follows the tactics of its predecessor by introducing a monster instead. So that's a positive. This has certain similarities to better Hong Kong horror films of the 1980s, which is a good thing. It has a B-grade script, which is kind of a flaw here, but it is atmospheric, creepy, and even a bit unpredictable. A nice variety of scare tactics are on display, and there are a few weird spellcasting rituals to enjoy as well, of course. So I really do think this sequel is better than the original. I viewed it without subtitles, just to let you know. And Devil Fetus 2 is available on YouTube without subtitles. So feel free to check it out. And we move on to our next sequel, Possessed 2 from 1984. Again, Hong Kong horror film. A family moves into an apartment, but are subsequently haunted by a violent spirit. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, how, Devil Fetus 2 and Possessed 2, you have the real generic premise of kind of almost like a spirit type thing, and because it's a Hong Kong horror film from the 80s, you get all this nutty, unconventional stuff that's thrown into it, and this film is similar. It makes it interesting to watch, because not many of these films have been made, and they certainly aren't made today very often. The dramatic elements in Possessed 2 are kind of bland, but my goodness, does this movie make up for it with some completely ridiculous horror sequences. There are plenty of surprises here, actually, which include 2 animal-human demonic hybrids that are very cheesy and an absolute riot to watch. There's a brief rat-owl scene, which I'm just going to leave it at that, which is hilarious, and the finale is sufficiently crazy. Not a quality film, by any means, but this is brainless fun. You won't be scared by this, but you'll probably laugh a lot, and sometimes, if you want to be entertained, that's enough. It's enough for me. So Possessed 2 is available on YouTube without subtitles. Again, remember, search the term Possessed Hong Kong Film. Alright, next. Alright, we got the first film in a very long series of horror films that continue to this day. Now, this film is entitled Shake, Rattle, and Roll, a Filipino horror anthology from 1984. So this popular horror film series from the Philippines has spawned 15 movies as of 2014. Now, I have not seen all of them, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to watch the rest, because the overall quality is rather unimpressive. Even the earlier installments are rather underwhelming, or at least aren't as good as their reputations, their internet reputations might suggest. But this is an anthology of 3 short films, 40 minutes each, approximately. The first story, entitled Bazo, is about some friends who perform a Spirit of the Glass ritual in an abandoned house, which causes misfortune later on. Now, considered by almost everyone online every review online that I've read, to be the weakest entry of this anthology, I would have to agree with, because it has way too much dull filler here, and nothing remotely memorable. Ugh, tongue twisters here. But I don't even remember much about it. I remember very little. I don't remember much. That's not a good thing. Not a good start to this franchise. Now, the second story is an improvement, fortunately, called Prettier, and it's about a haunted refrigerator that rapes and kills cute girls. Now you got me. Now you got me with the premise, all right? First segment, not impressive. You come with a refrigerator that kills. Now I'm in. You would assume that this was supposed to be a horror comedy, but it plays it pretty straight, actually, so you're not entirely sure if it was supposed to be humorous or not. It is chuckle-worthy at times, though, especially the death scenes. And, there's not much in terms of special effects, so the filmmakers basically just used a refrigerator. So I like this one. It's kind of a silly but watchable romp that gets some mileage out of its premise. I liked it. Now, the third story, Manananggal, is about a folklore monster that separates into 2 halves, one of which is bat-winged, flies through the air, and kills its victims. Kind of similar to like the Witch with the Flying Head movies that we've covered previously. This one is obviously the Filipino version of that. Now, a kid and his brother attempt to protect their grandmother when the beast attacks their home. This is a pretty good segment. I wouldn't say it's as good as their Killer Refrigerator segment, but it is pretty good. So in summary, you basically get 1 weak segment, 1 good segment, and then 1 pretty good segment. Not hardly the qualifications for a horror classic in my book, but this somehow spawned 14 sequels. So, DVD availability on this one, if you're interested, unfortunately it's difficult to find, but it does occasionally pop up on YouTube, but also gets taken down rather quickly. So whoever owns the rights to this is pretty diligent, but it usually pops up like for a few days every few months. I also viewed it without subtitles, but if you do see it and it does not have subtitles, you should be okay, because either before or after the film, you can look online and there are some very detailed plot summaries up there. So you can usually figure out everything that happened in the movie with the detailed plot summaries. Now next, Mermaid Legend. This is a good one. This is a very good one. This is a 1984 Japanese thriller horror hybrid. Now, when a fisherman stands in the way of an industrial scheme, the business developers have him murdered. His wife, a pearl diver, subsequently seeks vengeance. Now, the director here is Toshiharu Ikeda, who is most well known for his film Evil Dead Trap, which we'll get to later in this Asian horror movie playlist. But Mermaid Legend is his best film, in my opinion. The visuals here are very beautiful, with many shots of the ocean, both at surface level and underwater. Scoring is also really impressive and very tranquil, which assists the slow pace during the opening half. But don't let that fool you, because this film has a lot of bite to it, okay? So viewer beware of a few sex scenes and an escalating level of graphic bloody violence as the story crescendos to its conclusion. So in some ways, it's similar to Village of Doom. You know, it's a nice, dramatically based film. It has a good dramatic foundation, and it builds its conflicts, and it kind of it picks up steam and gets more and more intense as it goes along. This film, just like Village of Doom, features just how can I put this? It features one of the most stunning depictions of murder that I've ever seen. Okay, I think it's even more impressive than the one in Village of Doom. And when it happens and keeps happening, you just sit there in complete disbelief. It's good. This film should definitely be more well known because it's really good stuff. Kind of irritating, isn't it, that nobody just gets the rights for Village of Doom and Mermaid Legend, just releases it on DVD in the US? I mean, I can't imagine the rights for these films could be that freaking expensive. Just annoying. But luckily, Mermaid Legend is available on YouTube without subtitles. Now, the next films we cover are widely available, but they, not nearly as impressive as some of the films we covered already. And these are the notorious Guinea Pig series films. Now, these are 6 films, I believe, yes, that were released between 1985 and 1990. They're Japanese horror films with some comedy spliced in at times. So this notoriously gory series of short films, which average about 45 minutes each, on average, it suffers from a severe lack of good storytelling, but is chock full of gruesome violence and also some dashes of humor. Now, part 1 is called Devil's Experiment. Very basic film here. It's intended to mimic a snuff film. It comes off as mostly boring instead of engaging. The highlight here, though, is a sharp needle insertion through an eyeball. So, I really don't think it's worth watching for that scene alone. Just a basic, boring, monotonous torture film. Part 2, Flower of Flesh and Blood, isn't much better. It's basically a systematic dismemberment of a girl. Her hands are cut off, arms, legs, she's disemboweled, etc. It's definitely one of the goriest films I've seen, but it's also fairly boring due to its pace and repetition. When I previously covered Shogun Sadism in a previous video, I said how much that movie really succeeds despite the high level of torture that's shown on screen. And these first 2 films in this Guinea Pig series just, in my opinion, really fail in that regard. They just don't hold interest, even with their shorter run times. It's like after 5-10 minutes, they're like, yeah, I got the point, man. I mean, you gonna do anything else to keep me interested here or what? So not very impressive so far in this series. Let's see what's next. Things improve a little bit with the 3rd film, He Never Dies, which is a very comedic, albeit bloody story of a man's failed attempts to commit suicide. So, this is one of the better stories in this Guinea Pig series, because it does have some actual amusing moments to enjoy. Overall, I'd say it's just okay, though. It just has some pacing issues. This has kind of an interesting premise, because the dude just can't kill himself no matter what he does. It's kind of a great premise, but it doesn't really cash in on it very much. It's okay, I guess. The 4th film, Mermaid in a Manhole, shows the gradual deterioration of a mermaid into pus and worms, while a painter constructs her portrait. Again, an interesting premise here, right? It's probably the most highly acclaimed of this film series, and this film series isn't exactly acclaimed, but this is the one that people will say, yeah, this is the one out of this series of films that is the legitimately good one. I'd say it's pretty good, I guess. I mean, I still feel like it has some pacing issues and has a severe lack of content. I did like the ending. I would have to say that He Never Dies and Mermaid and Manhole are both pretty good, I would say. Part 5, Android of Notre Dame, is about a scientist who performs bad experiments on humans. Not much to see there. And I don't know what else to tell you about that one. Meh, M-E-H would be my entire review of that one. Part 6, Devil, Woman, Doctor. It shows a series of ailments that are kind of funny. It also includes a really angry turd in it, like a literal piece of crap that's angry. Well, I don't know, I found it kind of amusing, I guess, if you're into that kind of humor. Again, it's an installment it's okay, pretty good. So overall, though, I mean, out of the 6 films, really you have 3 that are decent, 3 that just are not good. For the most part, really, I think that only gorehounds will end up enjoying these to any significant degree. And don't get me wrong, I love my gore in my movies, but, I mean, you gotta give me a little bit more, man. I won't emphatically recommend these. In fact, I don't even think I would officially recommend them. However, they are pretty notorious. So, if you've heard of them before, you just want to check them out, see what they're about. They're widely available on DVD. I would say if you have to start, I think the DVD sets have 2 of these films on each DVD. So you have 3 DVDs. They have the 6 films on them. And one of the DVDs has both He Never Dies and Mermaid in a Manhole on the same DVD. So I would say if you really want to try this, check those 2 out first. Rent that DVD. Then if you like that one, those 2 films, then check out the rest. Now, I have to tell this funny story. Alright. Related to this film. Alright. Now, it involves our good friend Charlie Sheen. The crazy Charlie. So, according to Wikipedia, Charlie watched Flowers of Flesh and Blood. This was back like in the 80s or something. And mistaking it for a genuine snuff film, contacted the FBI to report it. And Wikipedia goes on to say that an FBI agent named Dan Codling informed Charlie that the FBI and Japanese authorities were already investigating the filmmakers, who were repeatedly interviewed by the Japanese police and eventually summoned to court to prove that the special effects were indeed fake. And this story is I almost don't believe it. Because, I mean, the human innards that are showcased, say, in Flowers of Flesh and Blood look like raspberry jello. I mean, it's not like the gore effects were great or anything, but, maybe Charlie watched it on a really grainy Betamax tape or something. I guess if you're watching a really grainy Betamax, maybe you thought it was real. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. That's kind of an amusing story related to these films. Alright, next. We have a Japanese horror film, again, called The Demon Within, 1985. So a ghost photographer and a journalist travel to a desolate forest to investigate a possible will-o'-the-wisps sighting. Now, after returning home to his wife, however, the journalist exhibits bizarre behavior. Something inside of his stomach has grown and is now attempting to get out. This has a runtime of less than an hour, but quite a lot happens here, and the storyline is actually nicely unpredictable. Another character is eventually introduced and exhibits an odd addiction that I won't spoil for you. So what we have here is, again, another kind of nutty film that has an odd mix of creepiness, effective gore, and cheesy fun. I mean, the monster is one tough bugger. Actually, I would say that the performances in this are actually pretty good too. Definitely a hidden gem to seek out. Now, Demon Within, unfortunately, is difficult to find, so you know what to do with that. Put it on your list. Oh man, I mean, we got some really entertaining stories in this frickin' film, in this this video. If you thought the Charlie Sheen story was ridiculous, you know, here we go. I've been kind of teasing you with this one for a while, and I mentioned in my review of A 1,000-Year-Old Fox from 1969 that the director Sang-ok-shin was kidnapped by Kim Jong-il, the now deceased dictator of North Korea, and forced to make a ripoff of Japanese kaiju movies, more specifically films like Godzilla and Daimajin. Those are the circumstances from which our next movie was made. No kidding. And we are talking, of course, about Pulgasari, a North Korean action horror hybrid from 1985. This will be the first and probably the last North Korean film we cover here. Not a whole lot of stuff coming out of North Korea that's available in the West. Now, in feudal Korea, a king controls the land with an iron fist, subjecting the peasantry to misery and starvation. Now, an old blacksmith who was sent to prison creates a tiny figurine of a monster by making a doll of rice. Now, when it comes into contact with the blood of the blacksmith's daughter, the creature springs to life, becoming a giant metal-eating monster named Pulgasari. Now, at Jong-il's disposal are hundreds of extras played by North Korean soldiers, but unfortunately this project ends up being more of a run-of-the-mill monster flick. There is some fun to be had when the rubber suit monster walks around and bashes some buildings, but the sound effects are quite dismal here. The sound design is really quite bad, especially the clanging of swords just does not sound right. And the entertainment value is less than a typical kaiju film from Japan. So unfortunately, the backstory of how this film was made is actually far more interesting than the film itself. And I mentioned previously that the director, in my previous video, I mentioned that the director eventually escaped North Korea and lived a fruitful life. But what I want to add are two more interesting tidbits, because obviously the story is more interesting than the film anyway. Number one, it is not easy to escape from North Korea, but this guy fled while attending a film festival in Austria. Apparently the North Korean government allowed him to go to this festival to promote, I guess, one of their films. Big mistake on their part. He was gone with his family. Number two, a second interesting tidbit. After his escape, he eventually landed in the United States, where he produced and directed a handful of films, which include the classic film Three Ninjas Knuckle Up. You really cannot you cannot make this stuff up, man. Crazy. Such entertainment value here, isn't there? Even when the films aren't that good, it's just there's always something crazy going on. These Asian horror films. So I don't recommend Pulgasari. A lot of people tend to seek it out, though, just based on the backstory of it. So your decision to make. Next one. It's called Guzoo Life After Dead, also known as The Thing Abandoned by God, a Japanese horror film from 1986. So 4 college girls stay at a residence to study, but are attacked by a deadly creature. This made-for-television film is only about 40 minutes long, but it does have a few very good, very bloody tentacle death sequences. You know, anytime you can get a tentacle death sequence, you know, you should definitely appreciate it, right? So obviously this film doesn't rely much on story or character development. How many films have we covered in this video that have already, right? But it is surprisingly entertaining in its simplicity, right? Limited locations and events here, so there's not a whole lot in terms of production value, but you know, this film doesn't mess around. It doesn't waste a lot of time, and it provides some good stuff to enjoy. Not a whole lot more to say about this one. I thought it was pretty good, actually, so I guess I would recommend it. Now, Guzoo Life After Dead is difficult to find, unfortunately, but if you come across it, check it out. Now, our next 2 films are, again, somewhat notorious. You know, maybe not quite as well known as the guinea pig films, but they are notorious. And the first one is called Entrails of a Virgin, also known as Guts of a Virgin, 1986. I would classify this as an exploitation film, Japanese exploitation horror comedy. So a group of photographers and models stay overnight at a secluded building, only to be stalked and slaughtered by a mud-caked killer with a monster penis. I am not joking. I am not exaggerating this plot synopsis. That is what actually happens. So at least 50% of this movie is really nothing more than like cheap softcore porn, with a notable emphasis on bodily fluids, unfortunately. However, the film kicks off when one of the dudes breaks out some classic professional wrestling moves on a naked woman. Like, when this scene happened, I couldn't stop laughing. I mean, he suplexed her, he pile-drived her, gave her a backbreaker, the Boston Crab, and then he finished her off with Sting's patented Scorpion Deathlock. I mean, man, that was a good scene. Very funny stuff, depending on your level of humor. You know, I went into this knowing what to expect. That was pretty funny. Now, what about the death scenes? Well, they range from stupidly funny to gruesome. You know, there is some gruesome stuff here. I found it to be rather entertaining and occasionally even surprising at times. It's really difficult for me to recommend a film this trashy to you, and I guess low quality in so many aspects. But if you have a peculiar sense of humor and you like trashy cult films, why not? Give it a go. Entrails of a Virgin is actually widely available. Well, there you go. We got a widely available one in. Pick up the DVD. Go ahead. And now we move on to its, well, I would have to call it a spin-off. Entrails of a Beautiful Woman. Again, 1986. They cranked both these out in the same year. Japanese horror comedy. For some reason, my notes say that this is not exploitative, so I'm pretty sure it is. And there must have been an omission. So, Entrails of a Virgin. It's not really a sequel. Some people list it as a sequel. It really isn't. It's kind of its own standalone film, almost like a spin-off. Now, in this one, the murder of a woman sets into motion a series of violent events. Similar to the first installment, there's plenty of nudity, sex, gore, and rape. But the mood is somehow kept light with props that are undeniably funny. So there's proficient use of fake appendages, 2 rubber penises, air hoses, a watermelon, etc. Kind of odd. The final 20 minutes I thought were actually really funny when a gargling flesh monster shows up and starts killing people in all sorts of cool ways. I don't know. I think both of these films, these Entrails films, are watchable oddities. I would suspect, though, that most viewers would not particularly enjoy them. But if you do decide to watch them, be sure to keep the kids away. You might want to lock them up in in a cupboard with a lock or something. You don't want your kids watching this stuff. And like Entrails of a Virgin, Entrails of a Beautiful Woman is also widely available on DVD for your enjoyment. I am not strongly recommending those 2 films. I'm just cautiously recommending them. You know if you like them. Come on, you know who you are. Next here, Japan again. Biotherapy, 1986. Japanese horror film. Group of scientists working on a serum derived from meteors are viciously murdered by a mysterious being who is clothed in a black almost trench coat, kind of like in a hat. At only 35 minutes long, this slasher-style film moves at a nice clip and it does have some impressive death scenes, including a great scene involving an eyeball. It is similar, I guess, in some ways to Guzoo Life After Dead due to its short runtime, limited locations, and slasher-style setup. Actually, the last handful of Japanese horror films we just covered have been slasher-like. But they all have their odd qualities to them. Again, not to harp on it, but a lot of these Asian films from the 80s, I mean, you might have a setup that seems like a typical ghost film or a typical slasher film, but when you actually watch the film, you're like, man, this stuff's nutty. It's totally different from a typical ghost or slasher film. So I enjoyed Biotherapy. I would recommend it. Difficult to find, though. You know what to do. Put it on your list. Be patient. Next here is a Filipino horror film called Halimaw from 1986. This consists of two stories. In comics, a young boy accidentally unleashes a comic book monster into the real world. There's an interesting premise. Now, the monster here has poor makeup effects and is basically a caveman with long fangs. I was kind of disappointed. When I read the premise, I'm like, oh, this should be pretty cool. And then the guy shows up and you're like, wow, really? I mean, this is kind of a cheesy kiddie horror flick. But it's, I don't know, I wouldn't say it won me over as it went along, but it's just so dumb that I felt like I could watch it. You know what I mean? Really low quality stuff, but it was okay. The second story, Halima Sabanga, is about a bloodthirsty creature who emerges from an ancient burial jar. There's some dull filler here to sit through, some annoying bickering between the characters. Runtime also feels too long, but the creature is scary looking. It's a woman with long white hair and really long fingernails, almost like Freddy Krueger. So, you know, she's really the only thing that makes this one watchable. So I would say that Halima, the anthology, is a very, very low priority item here. You know, if you get into these Filipino horror films from previous videos and this one, you get into them a lot, you might want to check it out. Now, what's the availability of Halimaw? It's available on YouTube without subtitles. A theme in this video. Now, our final film here for this particular video. Covering a lot of stuff here, aren't we? Stick with me. It's interesting stuff, isn't it? Is Death Powder. Japanese, I guess you could call it kind of a cyberpunk horror film from 1986. A group of people stumble upon a human body that emanates a white powder that causes hallucinations. Now, much of this low-budget film is pretty limp, with little in terms of visual audio spectacles and that accompany Japanese cyberpunk films. Like, we're going to get to some other cyberpunk films a little bit later on here. Probably in the next video, actually, we're going to cover a big one. That are very visually driven and impactful and really, really interesting stuff. This one's just feels limp when you compare it to other Japanese cyberpunk films. And this one, I don't even know if you really classify it as such. It deals a little bit with technology and stuff. It feels to me almost like a bad art house film with some really annoying extended montages of random pictures. You know, it's almost like, you know, if you look at some of David Lynch's worst projects, the stuff that's almost like where he just descends into just randomness. That's kind of what this is like. I don't like that type of film. You know, I like my weird stuff, but you gotta, when you get into total randomness, and it's just, you lose me. There is one cool hallucination sequence that I liked, but that one scene is nowhere near enough to propel even the fairly short 62-minute runtime. So Death Powder serves to remind us that weirdness does not always translate into entertaining cinema. So, part 2 of the 80s is in the books. Covered some oddball Japanese slasher-style films in this installment, as well as some additional loony Hong Kong flicks, of course. You can see that this decade, man, was just super saturated with cult cinema. And like I said with in my previous video, if you're into that stuff, you're going to have a ball here. So, as always, we'll see you next time.